everybody, welcome to Wonky Ankle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, as a Patreon request from Jay Collis, I will be talking about the third album from the Orb, Orbus Terrarum. Alright, well, I was planning on doing a discography review of the Orb at some point later on, possibly in 2019, but I'll admit said series is probably not going to be for a while, since there are others I want to do before that at the moment, so I agreed to cover this one early. So here we are. Now, if you're not already familiar with the Orb, well, you must be new to the channel. I've already talked about them at length several times. This particular lineup, aside from Alex Pedersen as usual, includes Thomas Fellman, who has been on nearly every Orb project to date, but this was the first one where he was really a major contributor. You can hear his influence in a semi-obvious way, especially on tracks like Plateau. And of course, Chris Weston was still technically on board at this point. He does have writing credits on every track, though he apparently left the Orb partway into the album's development. And also this album has credits from Simon Phillips, Tom Green, Andy Hughes, BJ Cole, Nick Burton, Chris Needs, and Paul Ferguson. Plenty of cooks in the kitchen, to say the least. That said, if you asked me if I thought this album was a good place to start if you were going into them for the first time, I would say no. Unless you're already into ambient music and think you can get into something like this. If you've not heard anything from the Orb before, I would more recommend starting with Adventures Beyond the Ultraworld and come back here later. And I say all this because I know this from experience. Because Orbus Terrarum was in fact my first exposure to the Orb. Well, aside from Little Fluffy Clouds as an out-of-context single, which I bought on iTunes and already loved, but never mind that. So I was already interested in the Orb, and I want to say later middle school years, obviously already being a huge Orbital fan for quite a while. At that point, I wanted to check out the other 90s ambient techno legends that had almost the exact same name. Figured I'd get something similar. And the library near our house had a CD copy of Orbus Terrarum available to check out, so I happily brought it home, and when I listened to it, I didn't really get it. I was really excited by the expansive track lengths before listening to it. I mean, the shortest track is Oxbow Lakes at 7.5 minutes, and Slug Dub, the longest one, 17 minutes. Which sounded really cool at the time, but once I sat down with it, I was really overwhelmed by how slow everything moved. It was so far removed from Little Fluffy Clouds and Orbital that it completely blindsided me. I don't remember hating the experience, but I do remember finding it really long and maybe kind of boring. That was, of course, before I figured out how to properly get into ambient music at all through the help of artists like Monolake in high school. Once Monolake kind of gave me an idea of what the proper way to digest this kind of project, and I had a proper appreciation for this kind of music, Orbus Terrarum is now one of my highest ranked Orb albums overall. Certainly my favorite of their ambient-centric work. It's just an absolutely incredible album in my opinion. Now, the theme of the album is noticeably different from the themes of the first two Orb albums. Those were about space and aliens and stuff, and this one stays grounded on Earth, obviously. But it serves as a cool reminder that you don't actually have to leave the planet to feel like you've entered into another world. Whenever I put this album on, I imagine these vast natural landscapes and expansive scenes without any people around. It's still an absolutely immersive and otherworldly experience. So yeah, let's talk individual tracks. Valley is our opener, tasked with setting the tone for the album, and it certainly pulls that off. It's a rather subtle piece, but one that's quite layered, starting out with waves of synths and samples that feel like you're touching down onto the Earth's surface from the sky, and then finally giving way to some more percussive elements, some shaky tambourine-like noises and rocky clanking, all the while accompanied by birds tweeting around you, and some of the airy synths and tiny little three-note riffs returned at various points. It just really sets up a full scene, as if I'm going through some kind of rocky jungle landscape. And mind you, this track is still only the intro and tone setter. It's not even one of my big favorites from this thing. Plateau is where this album really picks up for me. It's not a track I understood at all on first listen, used to think it was boring, but now it's one of the best ones on here. I mean, not a lot happens in its 13-minute running time, but the atmosphere is absolutely amazing. Very pastoral and picturesque. augmented by warm synth-plucking and expansive string-like pads, and later some almost unrecognizable female vocals. All the while, this very clockwork-like percussion track keeps chugging along. Feels kind of like driving through the mountains or something. No one's really around and the scenery around you isn't changing in a significant way, but it still looks really neat. I mean, it's not like there's no progression at all. It's just kind of minimal. Adding on percussion elements, taking them back away every now and then. And, yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say. There may not be much to it, but I never get sick of it. I could still be ready for it to go on twice as long by the time it's finished. But instead, it gets even better when the piano chords of Oxbow Lakes come in. I had a little easier time understanding this one as a little kid. Just the deep, echoing pianos really providing some emotional weight and obvious melodies right at the beginning. They were great. Do-do-do-do-do, do-do-do. But the track going on from there is almost like a descent further and further down into madness. The pianos give way into more and more psychedelic effects, jazzy percussion breakbeat loops, weird spaced-out synth progressions, and other strange elements. Though occasionally the melodies do return to the forefront, they never go away completely. The progression of the track bugged me as a little kid, but it's awesome all the way through now. And then we get Montagne der Gute Berg, which is probably my favorite track on the album at the moment, because I absolutely love the build-up it creates, starting out with a lot of spacey steel guitars, sort of calling back to the KLF's Chill Out, though accompanied by a lot of stranger synth effects and echoing dubby voice samples. Starts out fairly subtle and innocent, but as it goes on, it just intensifies further and further. About 4.5 minutes in, it starts to really build up a dramatic pulse. Like there's some light, but still driving cymbal percussion, and all these echoing and dark synth progressions. Feels like I've started up a Indiana Jones style ride on a mining cart or something. And then at the end it gets even crazier, bringing all this loud, banging industrial percussion, getting super intense here. By this point, the little kid in me was just getting really freaked out by the experience. The last 2 minutes or so of this track are just absolutely insane. And then finally, all culminates with some whirring machinery-like synth effects, which sound like they're only rising higher and higher, fading out into the distance, and then finally ending with a loud just such a freaking incredible track there. Despite all the different sounds that go into it, all the different parts transition perfectly into one another, and it's just so incredibly climactic. But that then transitions into a much more laid-back piece called White River Junction, another big favorite of mine, and probably the standout for me when the album first properly clicked with me in high school. It's another kind of strange piece that's kind of hard to describe. I guess it is maybe kind of like drifting down a river for a while with these waves of synth pads that provide a very laid-back vibe. But then there's a lot of weird mechanical noises that show up, and there's even some kind of funky synth licks in other parts that are just kind of more robotic, sort of. For a while it feels more like a river that runs through a factory or something like that. Even feels like it could be danceable to some degree in that one middle section that's more mechanical than the kind of more flowing and laid-back other parts of it. But all the various strange noises and melodies that come and go once again create a really captivating and immersive atmosphere. And there's other fun voice samples that come in, like the self-help tape at the beginning or the hypnotist or whatever at the end. But they're placed more like in the background as part of the atmosphere rather than just, plastered over, as if they're being announced over some intercom system, which I think is a really cool touch. I don't know, I've never heard anything quite like White River Junction before or since, and it's still one of the absolute best tracks for me, right up there with Montagne d'Or. And that leaves 2 more tracks, both very long and very odd. I'll admit I'm not as huge on these last 2 as I was on earlier ones, but they're still pretty great in their own right. Occidental starts out like it's going to be something more danceable, moving along at this steady pace, but the melodies are very thin and wiry, and the weird thumping and fiddling percussion seems to take precedence at times, but not always. Like at one point the beat just comes to a dead stop to take a break, and then picks up again for a little bit. And sometimes the melodies, which aren't even always in the same key, go away entirely. In fact, by about the halfway mark, all the dance elements are out of sync with each other, and soon enough they're just all completely gone and replaced with strange experimental effects. It's just everything is completely broken down. I do probably prefer the first half of this track to the second, but I do think this thing has this subtly creepy and unsettling nature to it that I find quite intriguing. Still a pretty great track, I gotta say. And we finally finish with the longest and most expansive track of them all, Slug Dub. This is a weird place to end, but it's one that I'd expect no less out of Dr. Alex Patterson. There's samples throughout from a recording of this old children's story about slugs going around and eating some family's lettuce, which are so these samples are just so distinctive and stick in your brain as such a strange and memorable idea. But in between the story of the slugs are big, long stretches of psychedelic weirdness that has some light dub reggae influences if you pay close enough attention. I'll be honest though, I kind of have a hard time focusing on the sound play of this track for the bulk of it. There is a consistent, if offbeat and unconventional pulse and some neat atmosphere that I can enjoy. Can kind of get banging and intense in parts, a bit dark and unpleasant in others, sometimes both, or neither. There's short moments on here that remind me a bit of the first Kraftwerk album if it had more musicality to it, and others that remind me of Towers of Dub from their second album if that were completely warped and messed up. All while there's little steel guitar riffs that pretty consistently stay around. But for the most part, the whole thing blends in the background pretty easily for me, aside from the samples of the slug story which stick out like a sore thumb. It's neat when I actually do pay attention to it and how much it keeps changing up, but doesn't leave quite as strong an impression as the other tracks on here. Everything is so formless it's hard to tell what's what sometimes, and despite all the weird and strange atonal noises, I actually find moments like Occidental to be more properly unsettling. Even that's not that unsettling, to be fair. But whatever, Slug Dub is certainly a very good track with lots of cool and interesting moments. It's a good ending to this album, but if I had to pick a least favorite track from here, it'd probably be that one. It is the one that probably prevents this album from crossing into 9 out of 10 territory for me. That track is still good, but, you know, I mean, the best moments on here are among the highest points of the entire Orb catalog to date. But yeah, needless to say, the good on this album far outweighs the meh. It kinda goes without saying that I think Orbus Terrarum is an absolutely essential listen. This isn't an easy listen by any stretch. While it has some more accessible moments, it was really testing me in others. And if you're not already into ambient music, it's more likely to freak you out and push you away. Or at least, that's what happened when I was little. But once it clicked, the entire world of ambient music opened up to me in a much more accessible way. By this point, I just have to marvel at all the detail and texture put into every track, how consistently engaged I am by all of it in spite of its frequent formlessness, how absolutely well executed the atmosphere is across the board, and how it fits as such a unique and memorable entrance into the Orb catalog. Sure, there are definitely moments I like more than others, and there are more consistent Orb albums than this. But the worst moments are still fun, and the best are so freaking amazing that they merit the purchase by themselves. Not much else to say. Orbus Terrarum is one of my personal favorite ambient albums, one of my favorite Orb albums, a big part of my life, and just wholeheartedly recommended. Check it out. I'm overall feeling an 8.7 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. If you want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. Other Patreon requests submitted to me will be covered at the beginning of November. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time. Laughing like the slugs right now.